3D imaging technicians scanned 2 mummies and took over 50,000 images.
Scientists are releasing new video showing X-rays of the alleged alien remains.
Researchers believe they've located the leading cause of death when it comes to mummies.
Scientists have just sequenced the DNA of 2 7,000-year-old mummies found in the middle of what is now the Sahara Desert. And what came back from the lab has rewritten the entire story of human ancestry in a way nobody was prepared for. These weren't Egyptian mummies wrapped in linen. These weren't pharaohs guarded by curses and gold. These were 2 women, naturally preserved in the dry heat of a Libyan rock shelter, buried alongside the remains of 13 other women and children, in a place that 7,000 years ago looked nothing like the barren wasteland that exists there today. And when researchers finally cracked open their genetic code, the results were so unexpected, so scientifically destabilizing, that one of the world's leading archaeogeneticists said it out loud. If you'd told me these genomes were 40,000 years old, I would have believed it. Share this with everyone you know, because the Takarkori rock shelter in southwestern Libya sits in a landscape that looks today like the end of the world. Endless sandy dunes and barren rock, reachable only by 4-wheel drive vehicle, baking under relentless desert sun. But 7,000 years ago, this was a savanna. A Mediterranean Serengeti teeming with permanent lakes, rivers, hippopotamuses, elephants, fish, and abundant wildlife. Between 14,500 and 5,000 years ago, the entire Sahara was transformed by what geologists call the African humid period, a climatic miracle that turned the world's largest hot desert into one of its most fertile landscapes. Before we break down exactly what the DNA revealed and why it forces a complete reconsideration of human history, make sure you subscribe to Vault of Discovery. We're giving you the real science that rewrites the textbooks. The excavation of Takarkori began in 2003, led by Professor Savino Di Lernia, an associate professor of African archaeology and ethnoarchaeology at Sapienza University of Rome. On the second day of the dig, they found the first mummy. We scratched the sand and found the mandible, Di Lernia recalled. 2 of the 15 individuals buried at the rock shelter had naturally mummified thanks to the extreme dryness of the desert air. Their skin, ligaments, and tissues preserved across 7 millennia in a way that almost never happens in hot environments. We started with these 2 because they are very well preserved. The skin, ligaments, tissues, Di Lernia said. The site contained evidence of continuous human occupation and pastoralism dating back more than 8,000 years. These were not nomadic drifters passing through. These were people who had been living in this place, building a civilization in a green Sahara for thousands of years. The scientific challenge of extracting DNA from mummies found in a hot desert environment is almost impossible to overstate. Ancient DNA degrades rapidly in heat. The extreme temperature swings of the Sahara, scorching by day, cold by night, shatter genetic material at the molecular level. Every previous attempt to recover usable DNA from North African archaeological sites in similar conditions had failed. This is the first time researchers have ever managed to sequence whole genomes from human remains found in such a hot and arid environment, a technical achievement that Johannes Krauss, senior author of the study and director at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, described with barely contained astonishment. These samples come from some of the oldest mummies in the world, Krauss noted. That we could sequence their entire genomes is a small miracle. The research team, led by archaeogeneticist Nada Salem at the Max Planck Institute, extracted DNA from the mummy's teeth and leg bones, the densest structures in the human body, where genetic material survives longest. They built complete genome sequences, then compared the Takarkori genomes against 795 present-day and 117 ancient genomes from Africa, Southwestern Asia, and Europe. An enormous data set designed to place these 2 women precisely within the human family tree. The expectation was that they would carry genetic signatures consistent with sub-Saharan African populations, the groups closest to them geographically, separated from Takarkori only by the width of the Sahara during its green period. That assumption collapsed the moment the results came back. Think about what this actually means. The Takarkori women carried no sub-Saharan African ancestry whatsoever. Zero. None. despite the fact that during the African humid period, the Sahara was fully traversable, a continuous green corridor that should, by every geographic and climatic logic, have connected the people of North Africa with those of sub-Saharan Africa through constant interaction, migration, and interbreeding. These two women showed no genetic evidence of any such mixing. Their DNA belonged to a population that had remained completely cut off from sub-Saharan African populations for tens of thousands of years, isolated inside the very landscape that appeared, from the outside, to be their most connected period of existence. But here's the first shocking twist. When researchers pushed further back into the genetic data to find the closest known relatives of these two women, what they found didn't match any nearby ancient population either. The Takarkori mummies were most closely related to 15,000-year-old hunter-gatherers buried in Tafaralt Cave in Morocco, a population that predates the African humid period entirely, that had no geographic overlap with the Takarkori region, and that shared with these women a deep genetic signature found nowhere else on Earth. Both the Takarkori mummies and the Tafaralt hunter-gatherers traced their ancestry to a North African lineage completely unrelated to sub-Saharan African populations, a lineage that had apparently existed across the northern edge of the continent for tens of thousands of years, largely invisible to science until this moment. And then it got stranger. Researchers pushed even further back, comparing the Takarkori genomes with one of the earliest known populations of Homo sapiens ever identified outside of Africa, 50,000-year-old individuals from Zlatý Kun in the Czech Republic, representing the very first wave of modern humans to leave the African continent. The results showed the Takarkori women were more closely related to this 50,000-year-old Czech lineage than to any sub-Saharan African population. This means the ancestors of these Libyan shepherdesses were part of, or closely connected to, the first wave of modern humans who walked out of Africa at the very dawn of human expansion across the globe. And then, somehow, they came back, or were left behind, and they stayed, genetically unchanged, for 50,000 years. Think about the implications of that number. While the rest of humanity spent 50,000 years spreading across every continent, developing thousands of languages, building civilizations from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley to Mesoamerica, mixing and merging and evolving in every direction, this population in North Africa remained genetically frozen, unmixed, untouched, an ancient lineage preserved in the Sahara while the world transformed around it, leaving behind only faint traces in the DNA of modern North Africans. Traces so subtle and unexpected that scientists gave this mystery population a haunting name before they found the physical evidence. They called it a ghost population, a human group whose existence had only ever been suspected from faint genetic echoes in living people, but whose bodies had never been found, until the sand of Takarkori gave up its dead. Our research challenges previous assumptions about North African population history and highlights the existence of a deeply rooted and long-isolated genetic lineage, said Neda Salem. This discovery reveals how pastoralism spread across the Green Sahara, likely through cultural exchange rather than large-scale migration. Then came the second devastating revelation, one that struck at the very foundation of how scientists believe civilization spreads. The Takarkori women were pastoralists. They herded sheep, goats, and cattle. They used pottery. They built a functioning agricultural community inside the Green Sahara at a time when farming and animal domestication were the cutting-edge technologies transforming human civilization across the ancient world. For decades, the scientific consensus held that pastoralism spread from the Near East, where sheep and goats were first domesticated, through waves of population movement, with farmers and herders physically migrating outward, carrying their animals and practices into new territories and absorbing or replacing the people they encountered. The Takarkori DNA destroyed that theory completely. Their genomes contain no ancestry from Near Eastern farmers, no Levantine genetic signatures, no European agricultural populations, nothing that would indicate any of the population movements that conventional models required to explain how herding reached the Sahara. Yet, they were clearly herding. They were clearly practicing an agricultural lifestyle. They had pottery from sub-Saharan Africa. They had pottery from the Nile Valley. We know now that they were isolated in terms of genetics, but not in cultural terms, Dialernia explained. There are a lot of networks that we know from several parts of the continent, because we have pottery coming from sub-Saharan Africa. We have pottery coming from the Nile Valley and the like. The Takarkori people were trading, they were interacting, they were absorbing ideas and technologies from surrounding civilizations, but they were not interbreeding with them. Knowledge flowed across the Green Sahara through cultural exchange, through trade routes, through contact between groups at watering holes and grazing grounds. But the people of Takarkori maintained their genetic boundaries across thousands of years of contact. Their tools, pottery, and even herding methods were adopted from outsiders, but there was little intermarriage, explained Johannes Krause. They're like living fossils, clinging to their ancestral root until the Sahara dried up. The entire model of how civilization spreads, migration, replacement, interbreeding, has to be reconsidered in light of what these two women's DNA proves is possible. But the third twist changes everything about what this ghost population's DNA reveals at the molecular level. Buried in the genome data was a number that forced researchers to completely rethink the Takarkori women's place in the story of human-Neanderthal interaction. The mummies carried Neanderthal DNA, approximately 0.15% of their total genome, about 1/10 of the quantity typically found in modern non-African humans. That tiny fraction is larger than what's found in most ancient or modern sub-Saharan Africans, but far smaller than the 1.5 to 2% Neanderthal inheritance that every human whose ancestry traces through Eurasia carries in their cells today. That fraction tells a story of timing. The ancestors of the Takarkori women encountered Neanderthals, or populations who had recently bred with Neanderthals, during the first great wave of human migration out of Africa, approximately 50,000 years ago. They carried that ancient encounter in their cells for 50,000 years. But they never went through the later, more intensive rounds of Neanderthal interbreeding that occurred as populations spread deeper into Europe and Asia. The Takarkori lineage may have been related to the very first group of modern humans to breed with Neanderthals, represented by those 50,000-year-old Zlatý Kun individuals in the Czech Republic, before returning to Africa or splitting off into North Africa, carrying only the earliest and faintest Neanderthal genetic trace before their millennia-long isolation began. Think about what this population's complete genetic picture reveals about the hidden complexity of early human history. For 50,000 years, through ice ages, green Saharas, and desertification, a branch of humanity sat at the crossroads of Africa and the rest of the world, borrowing ideas from every civilization that passed through, yet maintaining its own genetic integrity with a purity that has no parallel in the archaeological record. It's like a cultural island, said Krause. They absorbed ideas but kept their bloodline pure. Harald Ringbauer, researcher and group leader of archaeogenetics at the Max Planck Institute, noted that such isolated genetic ancestry was extraordinarily unusual compared with Europe, where constant mixing between populations left no comparable examples of genetic continuity over such timescales. Then the final game-changing truth emerged from the sediment layers surrounding the burials. The Takarkori population didn't disappear through conquest, disease, or displacement in the conventional sense. They were erased, slowly, inexorably, grain by grain, by the single most powerful force in Earth's history, climate change. Aridification turned the once lush oasis into the Sahara Desert known today, gradually collapsing the ecosystem that had sustained this ghost population for 50 millennia. As the lakes dried up and the grasslands turned to dunes, the carefully maintained cultural and genetic boundaries that had defined the Takarkori people became impossible to sustain. They were absorbed, finally, into the broader North African populations they had traded with but never merged with for thousands of years, leaving behind only faint genetic traces in modern North Africans, and two naturally mummified women in a Libyan rock shelter waiting for science to catch up. According to researchers, many more mummies and archaeological finds from this lost world may be hidden under the sands of the Sahara, buried in similar rock shelters and cave systems scattered across a desert that covers an area the size of the United States. The whole genome carries the DNA for many of your ancestors, said Harald Ringbauer. As you go along the genome, you start seeing the different trees of your ancestors. One genome carries the stories of many. and the stories carried in the genomes of these two women from Takarkori. Stories of 50,000 years of isolation, of cultural sophistication maintained without genetic compromise, of a ghost population that traded with the ancient world while remaining apart from it, are only the beginning of what the Sahara's buried dead have left to tell. Louise Humphrey, a research leader at the Natural History Museum's Center for Human Evolution Research in London, who was not involved in the study, confirmed what the findings mean for the broader field. DNA extracted from two pastoralist women who were buried at the rock shelter around 7,000 years ago reveals that most of their ancestry can be traced to a previously unknown ancient North African genetic lineage, she stated. Future research integrating archaeological and genomic evidence is likely to yield further insights into human migrations and cultural change in this region. One thing is absolutely certain. These two women, these two naturally mummified shepherdesses who died in a green Saharan savanna 7,000 years ago and lay forgotten beneath the sand until 2003, have done more to rewrite human history than almost any discovery of the modern era. They proved that a branch of humanity existed for 50,000 years in virtual genetic isolation, while borrowing knowledge freely from the civilizations around them. They proved that civilization can spread without migration. They proved that human populations can remain genetically stable across timescales that make recorded history look like a single afternoon. And they proved that beneath the largest desert on Earth, thousands more of their kind may still be waiting, naturally preserved, genetically intact, carrying the genetic memories of a world that the Sahara swallowed whole. The Sahara Desert covers an area the size of the United States, and researchers believe its rock shelters hide dozens more naturally mummified populations from the Green Sahara era, each carrying genetic data that could reveal entirely new branches of the human family tree. As DNA sequencing technology becomes more powerful and desert archaeology expands deeper into Libya, Algeria, Chad, and Niger, the ghost population of Takarkori may prove to be only the first of many lost lineages hiding beneath the sand. When the next mummy is found and its genome is sequenced, the story of who we are and how we spread across this planet may have to be rewritten all over again.